right? So wait till you hear his story. It's definitely an underdog story of survival, and it's brutally honest. And I think that you will be truly compelled. So enjoy.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me today. How's everyone doing?
Good.
All right, good. Give me just a moment, and I'll get the presentation going. So the first thing we're going to start with is my contact information. So you can access my website at www.slyoung.com, my blog on Huffington Post, which you're already familiar with, my email address if you want to reach out to me, and we'll talk about why you might want to reach out to me afterwards, at info@slyoung.com, and on Twitter at slyoungva. And so the first thing is for you to do is to log in, social media, Huffington Post, and connect with me on social media, comment on a post, and share an article. So that's part of your homework for today. So go ahead and do that real quick before we get started. All right, so why don't we go ahead, if I could just have everybody's attention now so that we can start the presentation. So today we're going to be discussing my unlikely journey from website to Huffington Post blogger. So my name is Stacy Young. Everybody calls me Sly. My published name is S.L. Young, and that's the name that you see on Huffington Post as well. I'm an author, blogger, business professor, and inspirational speaker. So I'm going to give you a little bit about my background. So in 10th grade, I failed 6 out of 7 classes, and I was directed to leave school. Nobody asked me if they could help me. They just told me to leave. That was the option that they provided to me. Fortunately, or unfortunately, I don't know if my mom was really smart, or maybe not so smart, I don't like to say crazy, but maybe not so smart. And she said, it's your life, it's your choice, you make a decision right now. And being in 10th grade and making a life-altering decision, that was a lot to be placed at my doorstep. But it was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me in my life, because it allowed me to make an adult decision and be accountable and responsible for my actions for really the first time in my life. I ended up graduating high school in the bottom 8% of my class. I made some adjustments after making a decision to stay in school, and what I didn't realize is in my second sophomore year, if you will, I was on the verge of failing again, and I didn't even realize that or recognize it until I wrote my book about my educational journey. Then I went on to college, even though I was told that I shouldn't go to college because I wouldn't make it. And I ended up leaving 2 colleges due to educational challenges. One of them was a result of a bad experience with a professor. The other one was based on me taking a bunch of classes distant learning that I shouldn't have taken. Because I wasn't a good student, I didn't have good study skills, so I shouldn't have taken classes distant learning. So I actually went to Strayer University for a while. I went to Northern Virginia Community College, otherwise known as Nova, for a while. Didn't do well at either of those. So what ended up happening was I went to work for a large corporation, went through their training program, which was actually a lot worse than a lot of the classroom activities that I had ever tried to complete. And what was interesting for me was that in this environment, in this corporate environment, I was able to excel. So I was trying to figure out, why am I excelling in the corporate environment and winning all of these awards, but I'm not doing well at school? So what I had to realize, and it was over a period of time, is that I needed to make the learning process significant for me. And that's what I wasn't doing, and I wasn't able to connect with the material in the way that it was presented. So I ended up going to the American University because a lot of folks that I worked with were going to the American University to obtain their master's degree. I decided to have a conversation with them, and I found out about a backdoor process to get into American. American's a pretty good school in Washington, right? Private university. So I had a conversation with admissions. I took some classes non-degree, which means I wasn't admitted into the school, but it gave me an opportunity that allowed me to prove that I was capable of doing college level work. So after taking a number of classes, I ended up getting admitted to American, finished my undergraduate degree at American University, and then I went on and earned 2 more master's degrees at the George Washington University. But I always had like this dream of being a writer. And I didn't know where it sort of came from. I just sort of had that feeling. And you probably have something that has happened in your life. You just sort of have this feeling. Something just makes you feel good, but you don't really know why. But you know when you're doing it, you feel good. And if you haven't gotten to that point, I hope you get there soon, because it's a great thing to be able to find a passion, right? So just to give you a little bit of information real quick about my publications. So I've written several publications. So Above Expectations, My Story, An Unlikely Journey from Almost Failing High School to Becoming a College Professor. Bullies, they're in your office too, Could You Be One? You probably thought bullies were something that you dealt with in high school, not necessarily in the workplace. There's a lot of bullies in the workplace also. Ethical Opportunity Cost, It's a Matter of Choice, details the importance of making choices related to ethics, because each of us are responsible for our actions. It's a Crazy World, Learn From It. It's a 4-part series of inspirational quotes. And then Management Spotlights about a lot of different topics. So let's talk about my journey. And even before let's talk about my journey a little bit. So last year, I released my first blog post in August 2013. And that probably was the most difficult part of my writing journey. Writing the books wasn't difficult. And for some reason, I'm able to connect with writing and I can do it fairly easily. But for some reason, putting that first blog post out there was very, very difficult. Why might it be a little bit more difficult to put out that first blog post versus writing a book? What might be the difference? Ma'am?
Because it's online, it's all of a sudden to the world. The book, usually have to have the readers and they automatically pick up the book, but it's releasing everything.
It's releasing everything, everywhere at the same time. So now, my books might be in a certain corner, certain folks might be reading them, but now I'm putting it on the internet, so it's available to a lot of folks. So as I was trying to decide, well, what do I want to write about? Because I know I want to write on my blog, but what do I want to write about? So last year, the March on Washington was happening, so I figured that was something that I could personally connect with, being a person of color. So I decided to write an article about that. And I was running out of time because I wanted to make sure that I did it right before the march, and I stayed up all night finalizing this article, rereading it and rereading it and rereading it to make sure that it was just right. And then I got to the moment probably around 5 o'clock in the morning when it was time to publish it to the world. And then I went, all right, I'm going to do it. Didn't do it. I said, all right, 10 minutes later, I'm going to do it. Didn't do it. And I went through that process a lot of times. Then I went home and I took a nap because I wasn't ready to do it, because I was like, this is something to make this leap. And then I just said, you know what? If I'm ever going to do it, I'm going to do it now. And I pressed click. And then all of a sudden it was released. So a lot of times the hardest part in our journey is taking that first step. And sometimes we have to take a leap of faith. So what I did was I took a leap of faith. And it didn't kill me, right? I just put it out there. I put so much pressure on myself that I didn't need to. What was different, other than it being on the internet, writing for a blog versus writing my books? Ma'am?
It's open for criticism and comments and all that sharing of,
Yeah, open for criticism and comments. And there are some not so nice folks out there on the internet, and this was my first experience writing. So what's one of the things that I probably didn't want to have happen with my first blog post? Heavy criticism, because what could potentially happen if I had heavy criticism?
It'll deter you.
Deter me. So, but what's the issue with that? The issue is I'm putting more pressure on myself, wondering about what somebody else is going to think about my work versus what I thought about my work. So which one should I put more focus on? Somebody else's opinion of my work or my own opinion? My own opinion. That should weigh very, very heavy. But a lot of times what we do is we rely on somebody else's opinion to drive what we do. And what I'm telling you now is just try to minimize someone else's influence on you, because they might lead you where they think you should go and maybe not where you need to go or where your life is meant for you to go. And that's a lot deeper conversation, but we can talk about that some other time. All right, so the hardest part was releasing my first blog post. Then I needed to create my own writing niche. So I needed to figure out what was I going to write about. So there's a lot of folks that write about education or business. And I said, what's significant to me is to be able to write about business and life. Didn't know what I was going to write about, but I said I'm going to write about categories of business and life. So I put those headers out on my blog right up front and say, this is what my intentions are. And then once I determine what my intentions are, I already developed my article on life, which is about the March on Washington, now I went to expand into the business area. So now I understood what I was going to write about. But the other thing that I did was I decided immediately that I was going to allow myself to be vulnerable. So what do you think about the word vulnerable or vulnerability? What comes to mind when you hear that word? Sir? Weakness. What else? Ma'am?
Transparency.
Transparency. Ma'am?
Oh.
Okay, I thought I heard something over here. Yeah, what word do you not so often hear related to the word vulnerability?
Confidence.
Confidence,
Strength.
strength. And actually, vulnerability is a confidence builder, and it can be a very powerful strength. Because once you realize that I can let go of whatever I'm carrying and share it with others, it's very, very, it allows yourself to be open, honest, and it releases a lot of unnecessary tension. So what I decided to do was to write very openly and honestly about my experiences. And then I received an invitation from the Huffington Post to be a blogger. And what's interesting about that is in March of this year, a friend of mine said to me that my writing was good enough to be on the Huffington Post. So I had never thought about it, because sometimes others will plant ideas. Because one of the things that I often like to say is sometimes others see things that you don't see. And I always like to keep things sort of stored. I call it planting seeds. So sometimes we'll say, oh, they said something to me, and let me just discount it. I'm not even going to use it. But what I do is, instead of saying I'm going to discount it, I just put it in there and say, I can't use it right now, but I might be able to use it in the future. So what I did was, I started submitting my articles to Huffington Post, thinking, okay, well, she says it's good enough. It must be pretty good. She reads Huffington Post regularly. I submitted my articles and waited, thinking, it's been a day. They'd get back to me, nothing. 2 days, nothing. A week later, nothing. 2 weeks later, still nothing. A month later, nothing. And I'm like, 3 months later, I guess they're not interested. And I had sort of figured that out after a few days. So I could have given up at that point, but I didn't want to give up because I still believed in my writing journey. So I continued to write throughout this process. And then we'll talk about, actually, maybe I'll talk about it right now. So in March of this year, I was moments from committing suicide. And the only reason that I didn't commit suicide was because I take care of my mom. I called my brother, trying to be tough at that particular moment when I was totally beaten, broken, and ready to die. I called him and I said, I need to make sure that you're going to take care of our mother. And he asked some questions, and then I started to break down as he started to ask the questions. And he said to me, why don't you use your own books to save yourself? That was actually pretty powerful, because that told me that I'm making too big of this, and that this particular moment in time, and what he reminded me of is that life is about moments. So I just needed to get past that moment. But he also told me to contact my sister. So I called her. And then shortly thereafter, I got up. And that was probably the most powerful thing that I could have done, is I got up that same afternoon, because I have a nonprofit. It's called Saving Our Communities at Risk Through Educational Services. The short name is Socrates. I'm playing words for Socrates because it's my way of teaching very open style question and answer. But I got up that same afternoon, within hours of about to commit suicide. I went to the jail to teach inmates. And that probably was the biggest step on my journey. I got up and kept moving forward. And then I also had something more significant. I didn't make it about me and my misery. I made it about, at that moment, I transitioned to thinking about what I had to offer and the folks that were waiting for me that night at the jail to teach. So that was the first starting point towards my journey to being a blogger on Huffington Post. The second significant point was after Robin Williams' death. Shortly after his death, I went on Facebook and then I saw a post from a friend of a friend that said, how could someone just throw their life away like that? And that was the first time, beyond the folks that knew what I was going through, that I said, I'm going to say something. And I wrote a response that said, you don't know what somebody else is going through. You might see them and you might think everything is okay, but everybody is going through something and you don't know what somebody else is going through. So that was the first moment that I soft disclosed about my issue. And then the next day I actually fully disclosed what I was going through. And then coincidentally, I got a call from a radio host that I'd been on a show before, and she said, hey, I've got a guest that's canceled. Would you like to come on? And I said, sure, but would you like to discuss something happy, or would you want to discuss something a little bit darker? And she said, let's go for the darker. And that was the first moment that I disclosed, not just to beyond my circle of friends that read my post on Facebook. I actually, excuse me. I actually disclosed on a national program that I was depressed and that I was moments from committing suicide. And that was the next turning point in my life, because at first, in March, I allowed my family to come in. Then, in August, I told the world. So before, I was worried about what others would think about my personal struggles and the things that I was going through. And in that moment, when I released that, then I let everything else go. And then I was no longer concerned. So remember earlier I said I was trying to become a blogger on Huffington Post. I had submitted all these articles. But I had sort of given up at that particular moment. But then I saw an article on the Huffington Post, just happened to come out of nowhere, that was about depression. And it said, well, you have a story and you'd like to share it. So I sent them, instead of writing something, I sent them a copy of 2 of my blog posts. And then within a couple of days, I received an invitation to become a blogger on Huffington Post. And that's sort of how it all happened. So a lot of times we think that we put something out there, we don't get a positive response, and then we should stop. Don't stop just because you didn't get a positive response at that moment, because there's a lot of folks that are going to tell you no. If you believe in what you're doing, continue to move forward. Because you never know what you're doing today, what the benefit it's going to have tomorrow. So if I had given up and not submitted anything else, then I wouldn't, one, be here talking to you right now, but I also wouldn't be blogging on Huffington Post, which is an incredible opportunity that gives me a lot bigger platform. Okay? So let's talk about writing. And I'm going to share with you some of the things that I use as I go through the process of writing. The first thing is to create a vision. You've got to know why you're writing. So you've got to be able to understand what your intentions are before you ever start to write. Why might it be important to understand what your intentions are before you ever start to write? Ma'am?
So what are you writing about if you don't know where it's going?
Right. So if you don't have a plan and you're just wandering aimlessly, where are you going? So you've got to at least have an idea, this is what I want to achieve, right? So always start with a vision. The other thing, take chances. How many of you like to take chances or take risks? Yeah, it can be a really good thing. Sometimes it doesn't turn out the way that we want, but sometimes there's incredible benefits that can happen just because you took a risk. So let's go back. I wanted to be a blogger on Huffington Post. Then I had this connection with Robin Williams and his depression. I decided to be vulnerable and take a risk and put out something that a lot of folks aren't willing to talk about. And then that led to an opportunity that I would not have had I not taken the risk. And now with my writing, so I'm writing on Huffington Post. They don't tell me what I can write about because I'm a consultant with Huffington Post. What they're allowing me to have is their platform. So I can write about anything I want, whenever I want, as much as I want. So I could easily say, I'm going to play it safe and write about safe topics, or I'm going to write about one particular category. Well, 2 things I decided, and I made an active decision to do this. I'm not going to play it safe, because I have all these things, and I have strong opinions about a lot of different things. I'm not going to play it safe. I'm going to write about what I believe. And the other thing is I'm going to write across categories. So I could easily just write about education or business, and then that would, I'd be able to create an audience and a following based on those particular categories. But from a strategic standpoint, because we always want to be strategic about the things that we do, I made a decision that I'm going to write about a lot of different categories. So if you look at the posts that I've already written, I have written in education and healthy living and something to do with race. I can't remember which category it's in, but I've written in a lot of different categories, okay? The other thing is, writing can be very boring because a lot of times writing is very homogenous. And the writers that stand out are the ones that are a little bit more compelling, they're a little bit more edgy, because otherwise you can read a lot of articles and like, well, didn't I read something similar to that? So what I tell folks to do is, one, give readers something that they can connect with, and it's okay to be original. I think too many times we try to follow a cookie cutter mode, and sometimes that works, but I think it's great when you can stand out and be independent, especially in your writing. Limit your interactions with naysayers. How many of you have ever had somebody tell you, no, you shouldn't do something, or no, you shouldn't, or you can't do something? You shouldn't or you can't. Yeah, it happens all the time. How many of you continue to move forward anyway? Well, good. That's great that you did that. Because we can't allow naysayers, folks that are telling us that we can't do things, to prevent us from moving forward. Because they may be giving you feedback and guidance based on their experiences. That might work for them. But they don't have any right to put limitations on what might work for you. Because part of your life's journey is to find out what works best for you and then to move toward it. And even if you're not successful, then you say, okay, it didn't work. But remember this, no matter what you do, there's always value in the journey, even if the outcome isn't as expected. Okay? So minimize conversation with anyone who doesn't appreciate the written work. And I'm very specific here about the written work, because there'll be folks that don't appreciate your work, but writing is very specific, very personal. So some folks aren't going to connect with your writing, and that's okay. So if you don't appreciate my work, that's fine. One of my biggest critics is a really, really good friend, one of my best friends for many, many years. And I'll give her my books, and she'll read them, or she'll read my articles. And some of my books, she goes, I don't like your books. I don't like your writing style. This is one of my really good friends. Do you think we get into arguments or fights about it? Nope. Because she's my really good friend, because she's opinionated, and she says it like she means it. And she's not going to tell me what I want to hear. And that's why I love her and appreciate her that much more, because what I do then is I go back and I say, okay, well, she said this doesn't work. And then I go back and I look at that section and then I rework it. And then I don't go back to her necessarily, because I don't want to hear two no's. But no, it's okay if she said it. But what I'll do is I'll rework the material. Write for yourself, think about the readers. Why is it important to write for yourself, but think about the readers? Why might that be important? Yeah?
You get across your main point, your main goal, but also you need to attract your target audience. So you also almost need to package it and present it to them in something that they would like.
Right. And if you start by writing for yourself, you're writing about something that's meaningful for you. And if it's meaningful for you, you're going to put more effort and energy into it. Sometimes I like to say that a lot of times folks will do things when time is allocated versus when their mind is dedicated. But I also like to say don't do anything until you're ready to tee off. That is, use your time, energy, and effort on fulfilling fantasies. And that's when you put your best effort into it. So writing is a very personal process, so you got to enjoy it. So if you're going to do it, enjoy it. But also, you've got to attempt to connect with your readers and their interests. So I might have something that's personal for me, but I also need to figure out what might be of importance to my readers. Not that that's why I'm writing it, but I want to make sure that I'm writing about something that will connect with them. Because if I'm writing about something and nobody can connect with it, it might not be something that's read or shared. The other thing that's important is to make sure that you're honest with your writing. Because if you are not honest with your writing, and you're not honest with the information that you're providing to your readers, they're not going to follow you. They're not going to trust you. And trust is very, very powerful. Because think about someone who has broken your trust. Do you look at them the same way? And you might even terminate the relationship with them. And we don't want our readers to terminate the relationship with us. We want to build a relationship with our readers so that they come in, and then they also influence more folks to read our work as well. Because the most powerful tool that we have as bloggers, as writers, is that when we put our stuff out there and we can get others to talk about our work, that's the most powerful marketing tool that's out there. Okay? So we talked about this a little bit already. Write once the mind is dedicated. Don't write just because the time is available. How many of you do things, you're like, oh, I got time, I'm just going to go ahead and do it right now? I've done that. But what happens when you work on something and you're not really committed to it? Is it your best product necessarily? No. And then what it ends up happening? So you start it, and then you don't finish it, and then you go back to it a little bit later and you look at it and you're like, man, that wasn't really what I wanted it to be. So now I need to go back and make adjustments. So now, instead of focusing on the time when my mind is ready to connect with it, now I've got to go back, look at it, review it, and then edit it, and then rewrite it sometimes because I wasn't connected with the work. So we want to make sure that our mind is dedicated to the task. This is one of the most important things that I can tell you as a writer. Don't worry about readers' reactions. Because if you're worried about readers' reactions, what are you not worried about? Delivering the best piece that you can on the topic that you're writing about. So you want to be able to make sure that you're putting your interest and effort into what you're writing about, but not thinking about what someone else might think about your article. Because are you ever going to know what somebody else might think about it? You might think, oh, they're going to think this is crap, but I'm going to put it out there anyway, and it might be the best thing that you've ever written, right? So don't think about what the readers are thinking about. Think about what it is that you want to communicate, what is the message that you want to deliver, and then let your readers come to their own conclusions, because you can never get into anybody else's head. But you also want to make sure that you're writing for a specific purpose. So it starts with that vision. Which actually leads to the next slide. Write for a purpose. So I have a little mnemonic. It's not grammatically correct, but I'm using dices, okay? So you have to understand the writing, why are you writing this piece? So is it for discussion? Is it for information? Is it for controversy? Is it for evolution? Or is it for satisfaction? So is this a piece that I just want folks to discuss? Is this a piece that I'm trying to provide some information because I'm trying to inform? Is this a piece that I'm trying to create a little bit of controversy? And controversy is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes controversy leads us to a better place than we are today. And is this piece something related to evolution? Do I want readers to evolve to a different way of thinking that's different than where they are today? Or is it just for personal satisfaction? And that's okay. Sometimes you can write for personal satisfaction and it doesn't meet any of those other categories, and that's okay too. But a lot of times if you're writing for satisfaction, you're going to hit one or more of those categories. The other biggest thing that I will tell you is keep writing. The more you write, the better the writing. So when I started writing a couple of years ago, my writing was okay. But what I continually do is to continually write, and I improve my writing and my writing style. So now that I have this bigger platform with Huffington Post, what it allows me to do is to take some of my earlier work and introduce it to a new audience. But when I go back and look at my earlier work, I actually rewrite it. I go back and I read it, and I rewrite it. Because is my writing and my writing style today the same as it was 2 years ago or even a year ago? No. So what I need to do is update my writing, because now I'm putting my writing out on Huffington Post and I'm trying to build a following and a connection to my work. So now what I need to do is to make sure that the writing that I did 2 years ago, if I'm repurposing it or taking it as is and putting it out there, it's at the same level of writing that all my other current work is. Make sense? Another big point, don't worry about perfection. We will never be perfect in anything that we do, so worry about excellence, and there's a difference. So in my classroom with my students, I tell my students at the beginning of the semester, don't worry about getting that A in the class, because if you get an A, that's great, but earn that A. I would rather you receive a C in my class and learn something than to receive an A and say that you just checked the box. Because one of the things that frustrates me to no end is when I get a second level class or I inherit someone else's students and then they come to me and the first couple of weeks I'm trying to find out what my students know, and I ask them a question about a term that they should have learned, a very basic term in the previous class, and they can't explain it to me. But they got an A in the previous class. So there's something wrong. So make sure that you apply excellence, because the only thing that you can do is be your best at that particular moment in time. Nothing more. So a lot of times what folks will do is they'll get too concerned about what somebody else is thinking or how they're going to perform, bless you, at that particular moment. So let's take, for instance, right now. In doing this presentation for you, before I started, I could have been worrying about what you're going to think. Am I going to cover the right material? I can't think about that. And even during, and I've done this in the past, even earlier this year, and I try not to do it anymore, in the middle of a presentation, I'm like, am I saying the right things? Is this really working? So I'm trying to communicate, but I'm criticizing and analyzing at the same time. So I purposely tell myself not to worry about that and just stay in the moment. Because if I stay in the moment, not worry about what's coming in the future or what I've done in the past, and I stay right in the moment, that allows me to be better connected. So that's the same advice that I give you for your writing. So when I write, I'm connected to my work. I try to get almost into, and actually I won't say I try to, I actually get it almost like in a trance-like environment. So a lot of times when I come up with ideas for my articles, and I don't know why this is, but it's in the bathroom. That's where I get a lot of my ideas. So like the other day when I was writing an article, I was shaving, one of my recent blog posts, more than a label. I was in the bathroom shaving, and I heard more than a word. And then I said, don't forget that. I don't know why I just heard this. You know, I believe in these, how many of you are willing to admit that you have voices that talk to you, or you think that you have an idea that pops in, you're like, where did that idea? You didn't think about it, but it just popped into your head. Come on. It happens to all of us. We just don't like to admit it. Just don't talk back, right? So what happens is, I'll get like these ideas that pop into my head. So I heard more than a word. So I'm like shaving, because I was only on this side of my face. So I still had my routine to go through. So I'm like, I got to keep all this done. I need to take my shower. And then I was like, okay, let me keep thinking. But also, when I'm in the shower, that's one of the times where I come up with the best ideas. Does that ever happen to you in the shower? Why do you think that is? It's relaxing. So when you're thinking about writing, take that same mentality. So for me, I'm standing in the shower just letting the water hit the back of my neck and just, okay, not thinking about anything. And then all the stuff starts popping into my head. Take that same attitude of being fully relaxed and take that to, and apply that to your writing. And then it allows you to be a little bit more creative. But back to my story. So I went downstairs, and before my computer was on, I said, I don't want to lose this flow, because the flow is already in my head. And flow is important. We'll talk about that too. And I said, let me just start writing. And then when my computer came on, I just started going. And I was like, I'm in this and I'm connected. And I was just writing. And then an hour and a half later, that article was done. And my article, more than a label, if you've read it, you'll understand. If you haven't, go back and read it. It's actually a very whimsical prose. And I didn't intend it, but I was in that moment of flow. So what does that moment of flow mean? What does that mean when you're in that moment of flow? Have any of you ever experienced flow? When you've experienced flow, what happened?
Just, it's like when you can just, like with writing and with writing, it's just like you can just express a lot at one time and kind of get like a lot out. Like, so for me, like if I'm writing a paper and I like really enjoy the topic, I can write like pages and pages about it, and it doesn't seem like I'm even writing that much.
Mm-hmm. And ma'am, you were shaking your head yes also?
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just comes naturally. You don't have to think about it. You're just there. And what I've learned to do as a writer is just write. And this year I actually started modifying my writing process, because a lot of times I'd start writing and oh no, that's not right. Let me go back. All right, no, that's not right. Let me go back. And I stopped doing that. Because what I want to continue in is that frame of mind of flow. Don't worry about what you're writing, because you've already put it in your mind, and you've told your mind, and the mind is a very powerful thing, right? You've already told your mind that you want to write. So don't think about it while you're writing. And I know that seems sort of counterintuitive, but just write. And then just write it all out, write whatever you want to say, and then go back and edit. Because if you start editing while you're going through it, you're interrupting those moments of flow, okay? Everything won't be received well. This is probably a powerful message. You think everything that you do, everybody's gonna like? No. So when you're putting your work out to the world, you're putting it out for commentary, criticism, and lots of other things, right? And some folks aren't necessarily all that nice. But you can't worry about that because you're always going to get criticism. Nobody's ever going to, 100% of folks aren't going to always like your work. So sometimes your articles aren't going to connect with your audience. You're like, oh man, I got this great idea. Let me put this down. Let me submit it out to the world. And then you're like, oh my gosh, folks hate it. Is that a bad thing? Is it? No. It just means that piece didn't connect. It connected with you for whatever reason, so you wrote it. So there was value in doing it because you had a reason that you wanted to do it, even if others don't connect with your work. Excuse me. Have fun. This is one of the most important things, just generally in life, is just to have fun. If you're doing something, enjoy what you're doing. And if you're not enjoying what you're doing, maybe you should be doing something else. For me, writing just happens to be one of those things that I stumbled into that I actually enjoy. I've been fortunate in my life to find several things that I'm really, really passionate about. And I didn't understand, folks would often say, find your passion. Well, that's easy to say if you don't know what it is, find your passion. It's easy to say if you found it, but if you haven't found it and you don't know what that feels like, it may not be as easy to do. But what I've discovered is my moments of passion is when I'm fully immersed in something, I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm not thinking about anything else that I'm supposed to be doing in the future. I'm not thinking about anything else except what I'm doing at that particular moment. So for me, fortunately, writing is something that I really, really enjoy. But for me, it actually falls into a bigger category, and I'll just sort of go off topic just a little bit. In my book where I write about my educational journey, fortunately for me, my mom actually kept a certificate that I received in first grade from my first grade teacher, and I actually have a copy of it in my book. And my first grade teacher, Ms. Powell, wrote that Stacy is a wonderful asset to the classroom. He helps those students that aren't as gifted. So when I found that and I was writing my book, it was really significant, and it actually helped me to understand passion, because what I didn't realize until I wrote the book is that I've always been a teacher. So, a lot of times folks will say, well, you're meant to do this, this, or this. Well, for me, I was always meant to be a teacher. And being a teacher doesn't mean that you have to stand up in front of a group of folks to teach. What I've done with my writing is understanding that I like to teach, because let's think about this for a moment. Sometimes you'll read an article, and you'll get all the way to the end of the article, and you're like, what is it that I was supposed to get out of that? Have you ever read an article and said that? Or, I'm not sure what the author's key points are, right? So in my writing, I try to take my teaching and apply it to my writing. So when you read my pieces, I'm delivering a specific message. So by the time you get to the end of my piece, you know exactly what I'm going to be telling you. You're going to know why I'm telling you this, and I'm going to tell you what my opinion is, whether you agree with it or not. That's a different issue. But I also will try, to the extent possible, to deliver a balanced argument on both sides. So have fun, but also understand that readers will understand if you're not committed to your work. You can tell when somebody rushed through something sometimes, or they didn't put a lot of thought into it, or it's a little sloppy. What's going to happen if you write something and your readers go out there and they say, oh, you know what? This was a great start to the article, but horrible finish. There weren't any key points in there. What's going to happen to those potential readers? They're going to go somewhere else. And we're trying to build a following. And it's really significant for me on Huffington Post because I don't work for Huffington Post. I'm a contractor with Huffington Post. So Huffington Post doesn't tell me what I write about, when I write about, or how many times I write about a particular topic. I have to figure it out for myself, and then I have to advertise it myself. So whenever I finish a piece, well actually even before I finish a piece, no, that's not correct. I finish the piece, and then when I'm about to submit it for Huffington Post publication, I will post it out on social media, out on Twitter, on Facebook, and Google+, and say, here's an advanced read of an article I'm submitting to Huffington Post. And then that allows me time to get some input or make some adjustments to my article. Then, once I've published it, I go back to those same social media channels, including LinkedIn also. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you can do that too. What I'll do is I'll send it out on all the different channels so that I have a greater opportunity for my work to reach other individuals or groups. And I use hashtags extensively so that folks can find my work. So here's my contact information again so that you have it. So the next thing that I want to do, and I'll leave this up for just a moment if you came in late. There's actually a homework assignment, so I probably should go back to the first slide if you came in late. Or an assignment to connect with me on social media, comment on a post, and share an article. So before, the next thing I wanted to do is to look at some of my work on Huffington Post, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But are there any questions right now? Yeah.
It's kind of like a opinion question, but so like, I really enjoy writing, but I get kind of like really down with kind of the rules and like styles that we have to listen to, and like that is what makes me kind of not want to write, is like being told how I have to write. How do you like suggest getting past that?
Well, I will tell you first and foremost, I'm a rebel. So, I mean, you can take that straight path and everybody will tell you, you got to do it this way. I don't like going down that straight and narrow path. I love going off the path, and sometimes, and I've done it too many times, going way off the path, and that's where the excitement is. If you think back to a point that I made earlier, is that writing, I believe, is too homogenous. Everybody has like a similar style, and what I purposely have decided to do with my blog posts is to make them solution-oriented. So I write about business and life, but make them solution-oriented. Because I read a lot of articles, and I'm like, yeah, those are some great points, but I didn't necessarily get, well, what do I do? Or what can I do with this material? Because not always are your readers going to necessarily understand that. So I don't worry about what anybody's thinking, or sometimes what I'm thinking. I just do it. So just do it, and don't worry about anybody's analysis, opinions, or criticism. Just stay in the moment and just do it. And don't worry about anything else. And when you can get to that point, you'll find that you'll open yourself up. Because now that I don't think about what anybody else is thinking about my writing, I just write. And it's very liberating. So if you like my pieces, great. If you don't like my pieces, that's great too. It's actually, just a quick aside, my brother and I had a very heated conversation probably about a month ago. And he asked me a question, but he answered it for me. He said, who are you writing for? And I said, he goes, you're writing for the audience. I said, no, I'm not. And I know this might be a little counterintuitive, but I'm not writing for the audience. I'm writing for me. And if folks connect with my work, great. If they don't connect with my work, great. It's just not for them. But I have to write for me and not write for the audience. Because if I'm writing for the audience, I'm not delivering the message, and I'm not being fully connected with the work, and I might not be delivering the best piece. So I don't worry about it. I write the piece, and when I feel it is ready to go, I put it out there. Any other questions? Ma'am.
So it sounds like you had to combat naysayers kind of from an early age. You said 10th grade.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that has helped you like build up a resilience for that in your professional career?
Oh, definitely. It's interesting, and just another quick aside. Some of my really close friends that have read all of my work and pieces, great fan base that I have and support system. One of the two questions that I ask all the time is about belief and resilience. Because those are two things that have allowed me to continue to move forward. First and foremost, you've got to have a belief in yourself. And that's actually an article that because I was like trying to remember what I was doing, I actually have it here, so I'll peek. So one of the pieces that I'm getting ready to post and actually redoing is Belief, an underutilized tool. And actually the other piece isn't related, but I'm also going to write a piece probably sometime soon about resilience. Because resilience is a very powerful tool, because we can have something happen to us and get knocked down and never get up. And the longer you stay down, the longer you stay down, you don't get up, you prevent from achieving your possibilities. So what I try to do is, one, I try to keep a positive perspective. So even if something bad happens to me, I don't say, well, this person did this, or this person did this, or I didn't do, I say, okay, why didn't this work? And I try to look at it from a positive perspective. But the same thing, like even when I was moments from committing suicide, the best thing that I was able to do was to get up. I mean, That's just crazy that it was approximately around 1:30 in the afternoon. I was an emotional wreck, and all I was thinking about was committing suicide, and I had already decided how I was going to do it. By 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I got up. And so what folks often ask me is, how do you get up? And I'm like, a lot of times I was saying, I don't know. But it's a belief in myself and understanding that no matter what you're going through, it's a moment. So whether you're like, oh my God, I can't get through this paper right now, it's a moment. That might not be the moment. Or you might be emotionally torn and ripped apart like I was. And if I would have committed suicide, it would have been stupid. Because I wouldn't be here now, I wouldn't be blogging on Huffington Post, and I wouldn't have an opportunity to change, potentially help change the lives of thousands of folks. And a lot of times, what happens is individuals are so concerned about what somebody else is thinking that we're not living our best life. And through all of my struggles, I'm now living my best life, and I believe that I'm living the life that I'm intended to have. Okay? Ma'am?
Is that also what kept you in school? Because I know you said that you were kind of didn't do so well and that you had the option to either drop out or continue going. Is that what kept you through, or like what led you to writing?
What led me to writing?
Because you said that you didn't really have any guidance through school, so what led you to choose that path?
Well, you know, part of it is sort of interesting because the one class that I did pass my sophomore year was English. I got a C in English, and I got and an F in everything else, including PE. How do you feel PE, right? But what I will tell you is a couple of things happened. One, somewhere after, well, I don't want to date myself, but somewhere after undergraduate, I had this thought that I wanted to write a book. And I started to write one about fear. And I probably should go back and write that book. But I got a couple of pages in, I even created a nice little book and had little pages, and it looked good, but I was like, oh, I don't want to do it. Then a few years later, a buddy of mine, we were at the gym playing racquetball, and we were just talking after playing a few games. I said to him, I'm going to write a book. And he said to me, I look forward to reading it. And that actually was a very important step. Why might that be important that I communicated that I wanted to write a book to someone else? Accountability. And the other thing about that is, when you put something out and you communicate it, what does your brain do? Ma'am?
It sees it as reality.
That, but what else does your brain do? Ma'am?
Kind of like stores it and makes you kind of check up on the stuff.
Exactly.
I read it.
Exactly. And so you could be like walking down in the park and your brain says, what's the status of that book? What's the status of that book? And, you know, and then it's like another 6 months goes by and you haven't done anything. And it's like, what's the status of that book? And then so you put it out there, but also the accountability. Because a lot of us don't like to be seen as failures. And when we say to someone, I'm going to do this, and you don't do it, guess what your friends and family sometimes do? What do? You know, it's happened to you. I thought you said you were going to write that book. What happened to it? Just talk again. And then that just gives you a little bit more motivation. So I use it, instead of a negative, as a motivator. And it is a reminder. Other questions? Ma'am.
This kind of piggybacking off the first question,
Yes.
but how do you develop your own unique style of writing? Like you said, your article is very solution oriented.
Yes.
When setting yourself apart, do you think it's more content or structure?
I don't think it's structure, so I'll start there. Because no one, I don't think, and I could be wrong, that most folks aren't going to look through my article and say, oh man, that's a great structure, right? They're going to say, great content, thought-provoking, innovative. That's what they're going to connect with. Because some folks might argue with me that, you know, I'm not supposed to think when I read an article. I'm just supposed to read and get information. Do whatever you want. You know, remember, go back to my grammatically incorrect dices. Understand why you're writing, and then just write. And what folks are going to connect to is the message. So, for example, there's a couple of things that have happened to me on my journey. So I've only been blogging, I don't think it's even been a month that I've been a blogger on Huffington Post. I've been a blogger for a year and a month, right? I've been a blogger on Huffington Post for a little bit over a month. And in this short period of time, I've had, and I hadn't always checked, but I just checked recently, my last 2 articles, one of them, the one about depression, it happens, on the health, you know, because Huffington Post has a lot of different categories. It made it, so on the healthy living page, I think it's number 2 now, but when I checked on Friday, it was in the #1 position on blogs that you should read or whatever the category is. Another article that I wrote recently, I'm doing so much writing I can't even keep up with my own thoughts anymore. But there was another article that I wrote that actually, the one that I said, More Than a Label, on, and I can't remember what the category, it's like people of color, voices of color, or something like that. It didn't make it sort of above the fold, but it was like you'd see it right away, but it made it on the sidebar. So what that tells me is that my writing is connecting at least with one person, one of the editors that's reviewing my work, so that just gives a little bit more powerful motivation to go forward. So you never know, the point is, you never know what piece you're going to write that's going to connect with viewers, readers. So let's just go over to Huffington Post real quick, and I'm going to pull up one of my posts here. This is the one, More Than a Label, that I just did. So this article here was, I submitted September 23rd. It was posted. This is my most shared, most liked article to date. And this is something that I'm very passionate about, is workplace bullying. But what I did was I took a topic. How many of you have heard of workplace bullying? Okay? So I took a topic, workplace bullying, and brought my own perspective to it and asked a titillating, thought-provoking question. Is workplace bullying the new discrimination? And you can see that in a short period of time, it's been liked a lot, shared a lot, retweeted, and then there's a bunch of shares on LinkedIn as well. So you never know what's going to connect with your audience. So write about what you want to write, but when you write about it in a meaningful way, and you can tell a story that's compelling, and when you can make those personal connections with your readers that draws them in, that's when you start to build an audience, because you never know what's going to connect. So I just write and I don't think about it, and I hope that my pieces are interesting, that readers are going to want to interact. And just one moment, and so forgive me if I already said this point. Actually, I don't think I have. So just talking about Huffington Post. So Huffington Post is a great platform, right? It has a worldwide audience. What do you think that the value is of me being on Huffington Post? What do you think? I'm sorry, so everybody can hear you too.
It reaches more people.
Reaches more people, that's great, yeah. But what else? I mean, something really significant. What's something that we want to have the experience with, or folks to think about our writing, or think about us as individuals, or think about our work? Ma'am?
Credibility.
Credibility, absolutely. And one of the things that I never even thought about when this offer just like dropped into my lap, what I never thought about is that having my name associated with Huffington Post automatically gives me credibility. Because before, where was I blogging? Where was I blogging? On my personal website. How many folks were seeing my work on my personal website? As many of the folks that I communicated to that wanted to read it, and the folks that they shared it with. Small audience. Now, I'm connected with Huffington Post, and so it gives me credibility. But the other thing that I didn't even think about, couldn't even have imagined, is what happens with having credibility associated with Huffington Post. Think about it. What happens with having the credibility of Huffington Post? Yeah.
More people went to your website?
Well, that can happen, but something bigger. So we already said I have credibility, and I haven't forgotten your question. But hopefully you haven't forgotten it. But credibility is important. More visitors to my website is important.
People are more interested in what you have to say, so they would maybe reach out to you more or ask you to come speak.
That's a good one too, but extend that. Ma'am?
You have to be very sure that what you're writing is true and honest, otherwise it reflects on the Huffington Post itself.
That's true too, because I actually put a piece out and they said, actually, I don't know if you read my very first blog post on Huffington Post about my depression and suicide, but I cited a former student. And they came back to me and said, do you have the approval of that student to use that student's words? And, I already knew that I needed to do that, so I'd already reached out to the student and asked for approval. But something more important, think strategically, think marketing, think significance. What major value am I getting from being associated with the Huffington Post? Ma'am?
There's like status and networking possibilities.
That's true
It
too.
also opens your name up to a larger demographic and audience.
Give me more. Give me more. Opens my name up to a larger audience and demographics. Give me more.
Different companies, different newspaper.
Come on, connect all the dots. Different companies, different newspapers.
The world.
Right, the world. But so I'm on Huffington Post. Huffington Post has a great reputation, and a lot of Well, I hope I'm developing it, right?
Like they have a good reputation, so that kind of reflects on like your reputation.
Well, that's it. But now you've taken us off the path. We were getting so warm. So now we have this connection. So company, networking. So what happens is, and you're going to go, oh. Being associated with Huffington Post, now I'm no longer a blogger on the website that folks says I'm not going to use that as a reference point, to now my article's being picked up by other outlets. That's bingo. That's the jackpot. And I never even imagined it, because one day I decided to do a Google search on an article name, and then I saw that my articles were being picked up on different outlets. And even on Twitter, folks were sending me messages where they create their own online newspapers, and they said, article via SL Young VA. And they let me know that my article is referenced. So now that's extending it even further. So now my articles are reaching further and further. So that is the big benefit. That's something that I couldn't even imagine. But one of the funny things that happened is that I did a Google search on this article in particular. And when I put it out there, I noticed that a law firm had referenced my article and stuff about my article, but they didn't make the connection to me. And I'm sure that your professor wants to ask you a question.
So what's the A word that we learned in here that we can reference this article if we do what?
Attribution.
So this law firm did not provide proper attribution.
Exactly. So what I'm thinking about doing is going out and making a post. That was a great article. It was located at Huffington Post on SL Young's blog, because they should have done that. Because what they tried to do is, and I'm just going to take it a step further, they sort of changed the words on the title of my article, reference the content, but that's the same thing. They still need to provide attribution. They need to disclose where they got the original information and not try to make it their own, and that's what they did. It was just surprising to me that a law firm would do that.
I'd be happy to let them buy the article from you, I'm sure.
Exactly. Sir?
I was going to ask, are there days where sometimes you just don't want to write, have no drive or motivation to write? If there are, how do you get yourself behind the computer or, at a notebook and write? Because I know as a writer, I suffer from that a lot. How do you motivate yourself and put yourself in that position to write?
Well, I'll answer it by telling a story, and then I'll add on it more. So I had lunch with a friend about a month ago, and she told me that she experienced writer's block. That's a foreign concept to me. I don't understand writer's block. And she said she starts to write, and she gets a couple of pages, she throws it away, or she can't go any further. So we had a conversation. So I said, tell me about your writing process. And so she told me more about her writing process, and then I said, okay, I know what the issue is. You're self-editing, you're self-filtering, and you're writing at a time that you probably shouldn't be writing. So about a week later, she sent me a Facebook message and went, yes, yes, yes. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. I'm like, what does that mean? And then she said, I don't have writer's block anymore, because what she was doing was she was doing all the things that I previously mentioned, and she wasn't, one, focusing on it when her mind was ready, and she's like, oh, I got time, I'm going to do it now. And then also she was editing as she went along and filtering. Don't edit or filter. First and foremost, make sure that you're ready to write. Your mind is dedicated to write. You're not self-filtering, editing, or anything else while you're writing, because you can do all of that afterwards. So when we were talking about earlier those moments of flow, just start writing, and then you'll learn to do it over time, because I haven't always been able to have these moments of flow. So I'll give you an example real quick. When I decided to write my book, and really be very open about my suicide and how did I recover. Because I bounced back pretty quickly from being in a very, very low moment. I wrote this book, and I told my sister, I said, I'm going to write a book about my depression. I said, I'm going to finish it in, so it was May. And I said, I'm going to finish it by next month. And she's like, wow, that's pretty ambitious. So 2 weeks later, it wasn't even 2 weeks later, I called her and I said, I'm done. She said, you're done? I'm like, how could you be done? I'm like, I'm done. And the entire writing process for me to write that book, and it's got volume, it took me probably less than 48 hours to write it. And what happened was, I told my sister, I said, I was just in a moment of flow. I said, I felt like I was writing and somebody was over my shoulder telling me what to write. And I just did it. And then interestingly enough, 2 weeks later, I happened to watch Oprah's Super Soul Sunday. And I was just at my mom's house, just randomly flipping channels. And I believe in destiny, fate, and other stuff. Something had me stop. And I didn't even know what the program was about, but I started watching it. And I said, you know what? I'm interested. Let me just go ahead and record it. So I set it up to be recorded, and then I watched it later, and then I had my moment of aha. This author, and I'm sorry I don't remember his name right now. Actually, it's like Stephen Pritchard or something like that. Oprah was asking him first about God, and she goes, what do you think about God? And he described it. And then she said, how do you know that you're in the presence of God? And then he said, I know that I'm in the presence of God when I'm writing and when I'm in those moments of flow, where I allow the ego to be pushed aside and I just write. I'm not, and then I look up from the page and then I say, where did that come from? Who wrote that? And I went, aha. Those are the moments that I feel now. Because I'm not thinking about what I'm writing. I'm in moments of flow. And sometimes now, I go back and look at some of my books. Because in 2 years, and I know you're going to find this a little crazy, but in 2 years, I've written 13 publications. Some of them were small. But my Bullies book, Above Expectations, my Ethics book, and then the story about my depression and suicide, all these books were completed in less than 2 years, in addition to all of my blogs. So what I'm telling you is, when you remove that overthinking and just do and exist, it works. You might not believe me right now, but just try it. It works for me. It didn't work at first, but the more you write, the more that you get yourself into that writing and that rhythm, it'll work. And if not, if you have questions, you can always contact me, okay? Because I'm more than willing to help. The other thing that I want to say just before I forget, if you're ever interested in maybe doing some editing or potentially writing a piece, maybe you have a piece that you're interested in writing and you want to pitch an idea with me, I'm more than open to doing an article with you, because I don't believe that, I'm a very, very big advocate about reaching back and helping others. And I saw something on a program just last night, and I'm not even going to try to quote it. I tried to quote it earlier and I killed it. So I'm not going to try to quote it. But just because my flame is shining really bright right now as it relates to having this audience, doesn't mean that I can't help your flame get a little bit brighter also, because it's not going to take anything away from me. So if I have an opportunity to help you, reach out to me. So if you have an idea that you want to write about, we can collaborate on something, and we can get you on the Huffington Post too. So I'm open to those ideas as well. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you. Thank you for your time.
All right, so you guys can wander on out of here. Stop by and ask a question if you have one. Otherwise, I will see you Thursday.